So give it a couple of more minutes so that more participants can join. So Megan, I think we can go ahead.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping items to start us off. So this is our Lunch and Learn on the perspectives on mental health. Access is everything. And we just want to go over a few Microsoft Teams best practices. Please click on the microphone icon to mute yourself, and please be on mute if you are not speaking. We also ask that you be off camera if you are not speaking, so that on camera you can see our speakers. And then also we do have an ASL interpreter, Amanda, and her video will be on the entire time. But if you need to see her more specifically, you can pin her to your specific screen. There's also the option to turn on captioning in Microsoft Teams. Start captioning. Again, that would just be for your individual teams if needed. Throughout the Lunch and Learn today, if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat feature, and we will be monitoring that as we go. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sharif.
Thank you so much, Megan, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn on the topic of mental health. As you all know, we are living through an unprecedented time with the pandemic and people working virtually, and this is causing a lot of mental health issues in addition to the existing conditions prior to the pandemic. And having events like today's event where we can have honest and trusting conversation, open conversation where people are allowed to speak up is the way for us to really make progress on that topic, educating everyone on the support that is available out there, but also equally important, raising awareness of mental health in whether it's someone we work with or a relative or a significant other. So this is really an important topic, and really it's an opportunity for us to together working to change the stigma that is out there about mental health conditions. With that, I'm very excited to have Tim Gillis, our Washington Metro Area Office Managing Partner, to share some opening remarks. Tim?
Thank you, Sharif. I'm deeply appreciative. And if any of you are connected to me on LinkedIn, you know that this issue is something that I have a deep connection to. So mental health issues and mental health awareness is extremely important to me and my family. And from personal experience, I know that many of you share that personal experience, and we all join with you in empathy and knowing how difficult issues around mental health. I'm really excited about the types of awareness that we now have in today's society and how much we're able to talk about mental health today in a way that in the past we would hardly have been able to talk. Just this morning, I'll give you an example. A dear friend executive here in the area posted a LinkedIn post to a podcast that Nigel Morris, the founder of QED Investors and the co-founder, along with Rich Fairbanks, of Capital One many, many years ago. Nigel's now leading QED Investors, a private equity and venture capital firm. And in this 42-minute podcast this morning, the one I was listening to this morning, Nigel spends 5 minutes or so at the very beginning of the podcast talking about issues of mental health. And as he put it on there, he said, you know, we need to get to the point where mental health and our ability to talk about mental health is like the ability we have when we walk into an office. My arm's hurting, or I've got an impingement here in my shoulder. He says, you know, we don't think twice about saying something like that, but we do think twice before we're open and vulnerable and honest about our mental health issues. You know, I'm also grateful for the chance to tell you that there's a lot of good hope on the horizon in the mental health arena. Some of you know I've written a book of poetry recently. If you haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. I just happen to have it with me today. And all proceeds from that book are going to the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation. So anything I sell, all the money goes to Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, which is a great foundation that focuses on grants for scientific research in the area of mental health and looking for solutions for those who suffer from mental health issues, solutions for the future. And we've also decided, and I give them away regularly at work, so Michelle and I also decided that, you know what, it doesn't matter if we get proceeds or not. For every book we give away, we're going to donate $25 each book to the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation also. And I tell you that not to say, hey, I'm a great guy. That's not the point. I tell you that to say this is really, really important to me. And you know, Joe has worked with me now 15 years, Joe Branch, and I see he's on here. And Joe's been front and center knowing about, in my own situation, in my own family, some of those areas. And Joe, I thank you for your 15 years of support. And I thank all of you for showing up today. Now, I want to be able to stay with you for the entire time today, but I can't do it. I actually have to entertain clients in just a moment. I have to go to lunch as things have begun to relax a bit and we can now get back together with clients. But I just wanted to say a couple of things before we go. Thank you to everyone who's pulled this together. Thank you to our guest speakers who are going to be with us today. Thank you to our Abilities in Motion, BRG. So grateful that you're doing this. And as KPMG recognizes National Mental Health Awareness Month, the Abilities in Motion, BRG, has partnered with the Hispanic, Latino, the veterans, the NO, KPMG Network of Women, African Ancestry Network, and the Pride BRGs to host a mental health virtual symposium throughout May and June. With You Are Not Alone as its theme, this symposium is open to everyone at KPMG, and it's intended to remind us that mental health affects all of us, regardless of the community with which we identify. And so events around like this today are events that will help raise awareness and provide useful resources to support those who have the need, and I'm one of them. So I'm with you here today in spirit. Sharif, thank you for having me on to kick this off. Thank you to our guests for joining us.
Tim, thank you so much for your opening remarks and the contribution you're making with the book. This is great. This is very encouraging. If I'll have the team follow up with you just to get more information and the link so that we can follow that. One other thing before introducing our first guest speaker that I want to also emphasize on a couple of things. One, probably like I mentioned in the beginning about how this is affecting pretty much everybody. Just heard in the news today that there have been studies recognizing that teenagers are being impacted by the mental health issues, where they are recognizing some eating disorder. So that's just another example. In addition, for those on the call on this event from KPMG, just reminding everyone about the Employee Assistance Program that is available with many resources out there, including 24/7 support service. If you don't have that information and you'd like to have access to it, just let us know. Reach the organizers here, Megan Cadigan and Isabella Coggins, and we would be happy to share with you that link. With that, I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker, Katrin Macari. Katrin has over 20 years of experience in the area of disability and inclusion. She's the CEO of Disability In, formerly known as BLN, Business Leadership Network, and also the CEO for C5 Consulting. And what's great about having Katrin here is that she's not giving only her perspective from experience for 20 years in the not-for-profit world, but also she's going to be sharing her perspective as a parent, which I believe is just a great added value for having her here. So with that, I'll pass it to Katrin.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharif. I really appreciate that. And welcome to everyone today. For those of you who may not know the Disability in DC Metro, we're a nonprofit, business-led network. We engage employers in dialogue through education and resources with the focus of removing attitudinal and organizational barriers by exchanging best practices to ensure that talent with disabilities is included in the workforce, marketplace, and as entrepreneurs. As we recognize Mental Health Awareness Month, I'd like you to consider several perspectives as we hear from our speakers today. 1, individuals living with mental health conditions or mental illness. 2, family, friends, coworkers, and allies of those individuals. And employers that want to ensure a workforce of well-being for all employees. A mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, or mood. These conditions impact day-to-day living and may also affect the ability to relate to others. Mental health conditions are far more common than you think, mainly because people don't talk about it. They're scared to talk about it. But the NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, has told us that 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience a serious mental illness each year. 1 in 6 U.S. youth, aged 6 to 17, experience a mental health disorder each year. And 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14, 75% by age 24. Of course, I don't think these stats have been updated as it relates to the pandemic. Mental illness includes clinical depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, dementia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and schizophrenia. It does, however, not exclude any dimension of diversity or disability. Now more than ever, we need to address the stigma associated with mental illness and the fear of speaking up. There's much work to be done, and we're hopeful that today's session will help open up the dialogue and recognize for all of us that disability is part of the human condition. Today, I'm happy to introduce my son, Jamie. He's a strong communicator, an agile thought leader, excellent problem solver, and most important for me today, a disability advocate. Respect for the individual, collaboration, and approachability constitute the core of his professional capabilities. What else can I say? I have seen him develop into a strong, caring adult, and I'm very proud of him. Thank you for being here today, Jamie.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm eager to discuss this with you all. And I think Sharif mentioned initially how COVID allowed for the opportunity to normalize anxiety and depression and mental illness, in that because it's situational, everyone can relate to being anxious or depressed about what's been going on in the world in the past year. And situational anxiety certainly is very prevalent and a very common form of mental illness. Hopefully what this will do is it will allow for further conversation about depression and anxiety that are not situational. And so it may be chemical in nature, or it may be pertaining to something else that's not as apparent as a job loss or a pandemic, for example. I have been around people with mental illness my entire life. I've also dealt with it myself. And in these experiences, it's allowed me to grow. And so as you turn it on its head and you view these struggles as opportunities to learn from them, it becomes less of something that's happening to you and more of something that's happening for you. And so through the situations that I've either been a part of or been witness to, I had a friend commit suicide when I was 18. And I had no inclination that he was struggling. I was with him the night before. We had a good night. And so on the surface, again, that didn't make sense. Just like it may not make sense to consider Robin Williams and how he took his life. And so I think it's important to understand that there are various forms of this, some that are surface level, where we say this person has experienced a tragedy, I can understand why they're anxious and have depression. But it's not always that simple, and oftentimes it's not at all. And so I'd like to talk about, what drives anxiety. It's lack of control. It's fear of the unknown. And with the pandemic, obviously, at one point, we were thinking that it might last a couple of weeks, and that stretched into months. And many of us maybe thought this would be years, but it was unknown. We had no control. And that applies to the pandemic, but it also applies to our day-to-day lives. The truth of the matter is, we have a lot of responsibility in terms of how we respond to what happens in our life, but there are things that are out of our control. And so it's important that we control those controllables, spend less time replaying the past and less time fixating on what might be in the future, and more time being in the present. It's the time spent in the past and the time spent in the future that is that energy suck. It's that waste of time. It's exhausting because both are out of your control and you're not in the present moment. It's sort of, I equate it to walking down the street, and as you approach every corner or alley, being fearful of someone jumping out at you. Do you stop and just not continue to walk because it might be paralyzing? Or do you plow forward even with that anxiety that's gripping you? But it's exhausting, and it's a heck of a way to live. And so I think it's important that we consider that more and more people have mental illness, that it's not unusual. As Tim mentioned before, breaking down the stigmas where we can get to a point where I thought it was a good example where you can refer to an orthopedic injury with your friends in the same sense of a mental illness. And even just thinking about that and the stigmas that go along with it, it occurred to me yesterday as I was preparing to speak to you today that There's even a stigma in my mind around referring to it as mental illness versus mental wellness. So you'll still see advertisements or read articles promoting mental wellness. And I think that's something that has been around for a while. But when you talk about it as a mental illness, that's where the stigma comes into place. And those stigmas pertain to, it's a different stigma if you're a male. It's a different stigma if you're a mother. It's a different stigma if you're an adult versus a child. Different stigma if you're a working professional. It's something that you think that you have to keep secret. And so as we talk more and more about this, and the pandemic has opened up that conversation, the hope is that we can get to a point where it normalizes the discussion, not just to say, I'm suffering from anxiety or depression because of a global pandemic, but I haven't been feeling well for months and I've seen somebody and I've been talking to a therapist, or I'm taking medication and I'm trying to work through this. It's important to talk to others. And when you do, you realize that more and more people, we're a lot more similar than we are different. And that's something that once I opened up and spoke to friends of mine about struggles that I've had, their response to me so many times was, I never would have guessed. And I always say, well, I probably fake it very well, which then leads me to realize a lot of other people are faking it too. And so you never know what's going on. You know, we see people's highlight films. We never see really what's behind the curtain unless they're a near and dear friend of ours. And we get caught up in comparing ourselves to others via social media or other platforms. But it's not a true comparison. Again, we're comparing the worst of ourselves that we know to be true to the best of others because that's all that we see. And certainly that's obviously setting our mind up for failure and going to lead us down a bad path. So when I think about anxiety and depression and mental illness, I think about the various stages. You've heard of the stages of grief. I consider through my own experience and through seeing others around me, stages of mental illness, specifically in this case, anxiety and depression. And these aren't, of course, the only stages, and they're not linear. This may not be the specific order, but I think when you consider these stages and how you can move out of them into a better place, it's helpful to see the path. So for a lot of times, it begins with denial. You're fine. You don't have a problem. You're not suffering. You're not struggling. It's just a case of the blues. And then maybe you talk to your doctor and they recommend that you see someone or medication. Sometimes arrogance will set in and you say, I'm stronger than that. I don't require medication. That's something that I've dealt with previously. And then once you move on from the denial and sort of that arrogance, as I refer to, oftentimes people move into that stage of shame. And sometimes it leans towards feeling like a victim. And that's the stage that seems impossible to get out of when you're in that stage. Until you've moved to the next stage, which is acceptance, it's very hard to get out of that feeling of shame. When you accept that there are so many other people that are dealing with the same things that you are, 330 million people, it's hard to believe that you're alone, right? Do the math and think about it. Once you accept that it's not abnormal, once you accept that it's no different than having medication for your mental health is no different than requiring medication to regulate your blood pressure. Once you accept these things, you can then move on into the stage where you're seeking improvement and you move from feeling like a powerless victim to more like an empowered champion. And that's when you begin to advocate for yourself. And so I'd just like to close with sort of what I have found to be what I refer to as unlockers. These unlock opportunity for you. They unlock a new vision that maybe you haven't looked at life through previously. Things like self-awareness and being present. Being present is obvious. I mentioned that previously. But also self-awareness. You know, it occurs to you, gee, I haven't been, I'll give you an example. At one point I was drinking too much coffee. The caffeine was making me jittery and anxious, and I was having a hard time sleeping. And I kept becoming frustrated with myself about why am I not sleeping well? I had to sit back and think, it's obvious I'm doing it to myself. And so sometimes just stepping out of yourself to have that self-awareness will allow you to better advocate for yourself. Gratitude is a great unlocker. Every day, whether it be that you write something down, or whether it be that when you wake up in the morning, you take a few minutes to consider what you're grateful for, or I like to do at the end of the day, I get to consider the things that I'm grateful for, and they could be very, very small. There was a tough time in my life where some of these items of gratitude at the end of the day might have just been that the sun was out, or that I had my health that day. For others, it's much larger. But gratitude is a great unlocker. When you control the controllables and you realize that we don't have control over many things that occur within our life, but we're 100% responsible for how we respond to that. That's empowering when you realize you have more power than you realize. You have more power than you think. And so we think things are happening, I feel out of control, I feel smothered by anxiety or depression. You have no power. Once you realize that you do have power in your response, it's a great unlocker. And so I talk a lot about becoming an advocate for yourself. That's obviously easier said than done. And that doesn't mean that you do it alone by any stretch. You do it by talking to people. You do it perhaps through medication, perhaps through exercise, perhaps through reading. I've read more in the past few years than I've ever read in my life. And in reading not just self-improvement type materials, I like to read biographies because I like to learn about how some of the strongest, most famous, most powerful, most influential people all have had very difficult times. They've all been through struggles, some of them from a mental health standpoint. And you realize, again, we're a lot more similar than we are different. But if you'll try and take just a few of these things as your opportunity to advocate for yourself, I read a quote once, and the quote said, if you're sitting around waiting to feel different, it's going to be a long wait. And so I encourage people who are struggling to talk to someone, allow someone to help you advocate for yourself as an advocate for you. It could be a friend, it could be a family member. But in doing so, remember that there's a high chance that they have either experienced the same thing or known someone else who has as well. And so with that said, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today and encourage anyone who is struggling with their mental wellness to please speak to someone about it. And remember that you have more power in your response to actions than you might realize. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Jamie. Still absorbing all of that. I think you expressed things so well, and I really appreciate your sharing. Next, I'd like to introduce Greg. He's the CEO of the Employee Assistance Professionals Association, or EAPA, and he's responsible for strategy, direction, and operations for the organization, which has members in over 40 countries around the globe, promoting the highest standards of EA practice, education, and credentialing services in the development of EA professionals and programs. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Jamie, for the personal walkthrough empowerment. I'm going to capitalize on your use of the word power several times. Hello to everybody. It's nice to be with you today. I've been involved with the employee assistance world for about 40 years. That's what all this gray hair is for, or from. But I also take great interest in the entire spectrum of conversation around disability inclusion in the workplace. I come from a family of chronic illness. My mother, the entirety of her lifetime, from early teenage years through passing at age 60, a very severe arthritic, very severe diabetic, One of my brothers-in-law has been wheelchair bound for 40 years. Amazing, he survived 40 years. One of our sons has a very significant central auditory processing learning disability. And that's in addition to the work I've done. Disability inclusion in the workplace to me is an essential issue, and it's one that I've spent a lot of time in and trying to deal with. Prior to my role at the EAP Association, I was with an internal employee assistance program professional, meaning working within one company for 33 and a half years. A specialty steel company in Reading, Pennsylvania, with operations in 11 U.S. states, 6 non-U.S. countries. But all of that just to set the stage for, I want to talk about what's been happening through COVID and what's going on in terms of disability inclusion in the workplace from an employee assistance perspective. First, the employee assistance, if we can there we go. In talking with my peers over the last 14 months of COVID, clearly there's been an increased use of employee assistance. We measure that with a large sampling of employee assistance program providers, anywhere from 33 to 106% increase. The 106% increase, my colleague Dan Hughes with Mount Sinai Health System in New York City, 42,000 employees in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. Healthcare ground zero during all of this in terms of COVID. 106% increase in the use of their employee assistance program. You'd expect in a healthcare setting that there would be an increase. There certainly has been. And this is but one example. But across the board, almost doesn't matter what type of program it is, what style, what structure, internal, external, contract, or staff from within. The incidence of issues brought on by COVID and the response through employee assistance, consistent increases across the board. That's called for a heavy virtual delivery platforms to be used. It can't possibly be done one-to-one with that kind of load, one-to-one face-to-face, and so in fact the face-to-face at times was just prohibited. There were global and U.S. regional differences in employee assistance delivery and utilization. There's a lot of cultural issues, even within the U.S., not just non-U.S. But the issues that came forth with to employee assistance over and over again, regardless of the setting, the transition from office to home and now home back to office, to return to in-person work and all the issues brought on by that, including the anticipatory anxiety of return to in-person work. Even as small as how do you handle forms that used to be done face-to-face and with live signatures? How do you do that on a virtual platform? Now, those of you working with KPMG, it would be routine to be able to scan, print, sign, all that's routine. But if you're in a rural part of the U.S. and connectivity is lousy, if existing at all of a sudden there's challenges here. Or what if the only exchange is through me sitting in this office in Arlington, Virginia, and you on your phone sitting in your car, and we're having this, how do we handle things as basic as forms? How do we handle things like fitness for duty in assessing whether someone's safely or competently able to do their job? And we need to do that through FaceTime. How are we doing that? So the whole process of delivery of employee assistance services has been challenged through all of this. There's been an issue about across state lines. Each U.S. state, there's 50 different licensure arrangements. And if you cross state lines, in theory, not just theory, in regulation, you're prohibited from providing a counseling service. Well, in this virtual environment, and people now working from wherever they're working, those rules through The compliments of the U.S. federal government and many of the states have been relaxed during COVID. There's a sunset on that at the end of June. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, to see if this is one of those legacies of COVID that stays, a relaxing of those rules. Something I'm sure you've experienced, work creep. The clock almost seems to not matter. If there ever was an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 day, it's a distant, it's a ghost now. You're answering, so am I answering emails, going on to, we're listening to webinars, and we're listening to things at midnight because we're up, we're okay, let's listen to it, let's get one more thing done. The whole notion of work creep is one of the legacies of COVID and one of the legacies of remote work. One of the things that also challenged employee assistance during all of this is the response to the huge social justice issues that have been facing us here in the U.S. Very timely in this week, year post George Floyd. But also, these things have been experienced in the HR environment, not just in the employee assistance environment. I want to come back to that later. It's an important analogy. But if you look through all of these things and what we're all experiencing through COVID, who wouldn't be anxious at this point? And who wouldn't at times feel isolated? And who wouldn't at times even feel depressed? And just as Jamie mentioned, that there's a whole lot more people out there than we like to think or we even think about. There's a whole lot more people out there going through these various challenges. And some have been chronic and debilitating, and some are more recent and probably episodic. But nonetheless, anxiety, isolation, depression, they have become our norms here in the U.S. Next slide, please. So one of the things that had been experienced in employee assistance, and I'll just run through these very quickly. I'm aware of the time. Anxiety and trouble sleeping, problems with relationships, partly related to being cooped up at home together unexpectedly for a much longer than expected. Anticipatory anxiety about illness, about COVID, about being a carrier, an unintentional carrier and infecting others, about returning to in-person work, about not having work at all. Chairman Powell of the Fed Reserve back in March talked about 40% of employees in the U.S. who made less than $40,000 a year don't have a job. Now think about that, the implications of that across on a society level. If that's a primary income, that's a huge problem. If it's a secondary income in the household, it's still a huge problem. 40%. In his estimation, Chairman Powell's estimation, that many of those jobs never come back. So the anxiety about these things are real. And those who are facing child care issues or senior care issues, I can tell you in our family, my mother-in-law last Monday turned 99 years old. She's in Cheshire, Connecticut. We live in Pennsylvania. I work here in Virginia. That makes it complicated enough. But the home care issues, the senior care issues, the child care issues have been enormous over the last 14 months. That too contributes to anxiety, isolation, sometimes depression. You can pick a study and you're going to find out that alcohol use is up, marijuana use is up, prescription medication use is up, opioid use is up. We still had 38,000 opioid-related deaths last year in the U.S. Forgetting COVID, we still have 38,000 opioid deaths. That isolation and depression is now looking like grief. There's been an increase in suicide, especially among youth. There's a heavy undercurrent of financial wellness issues, and there's been a really disturbing pattern of increased partner violence through all of this. There was an interesting phenomena early in COVID where 911 calls went up with regard to domestic violence, and the agency services calls went down. Now that's leveled out, and the agency service calls are picking up more so than 911. If you think about it, why would that even happen? Well, in the issues revolving around intimate partner violence, you need a safe place to talk. If you don't have a safe place to talk, you don't talk, period, until there's an incident. And so the calls were coming in not prior to, but during or after. That's what the 911 calls were. There's a considerable outreach going on in the intimate partner violence world now as COVID starts to wane a bit, to get in front of this issue, because it can become really all-consuming. And there isn't a single employer I know of, if they're honest, who can say that their workplace is not also the place where a lot of intimate partner issues play out. You know, for all the publicity that workplace violence gets, deservedly so, the number one cause of workplace violence are domestic issues played out at work. That can't be ignored by employers. So the HR world and the employee assistance world have experienced these things because this is what employees bring to the work setting, whether it's in person or virtual. And so part of the response here through COVID has been access, access, access. We have to find ways to get employees easy access to the services they need as they need them. Next slide, please. So what have we learned through all this? Through the last 14 months of COVID and the general effect on the workplace, what have we really learned? Forgetting for the moment COVID and forgetting for the moment the topic today, we've learned how to communicate, and we've learned how to communicate differently because we're not down the hall from each other. We're not in an office next door to each other. We're not on the plant floor necessarily next to each other. We're communicating differently. We've employed new and different tools, not new tools, but different tools in new ways to communicate. We've also managed to figure out a way to hire differently, to employ people differently, to train people differently through the last 14 months. We've also worked on and learned from the fact that how we're going to interact, teams, groups, new employees. How do you onboard in the COVID era when no one can come into the office? Or how do you onboard where even the chatbot-based onboarding had to be different because of connectivity issues? We were using skills in a different way than we used to, and we developed considerable acumen in the situational leadership realm. I've heard that from one employer after another. Different people step forward at different times in different ways to take the lead. That might not necessarily happen if they're all in the same room together. There was a lot of empowerment through this process too. Where we work and when we work has changed. And to the point where we'd even think of using the word workspace rather than workplace, because workspace is wherever that work is taking place. Back of the car, sitting in the backyard, in an office like I'm in now, all sorts of workspace. And online platforms, not just for communications, but groups like BetterHelp and TalkSpace, online mental health counseling services. Enormous business has grown out of this, out of need and having met the need. But a lot of collaboration has been also learned through this. But there's a point in bringing all of this up, all these adaptations. If you think of the struggle that has gone on in disability inclusion in the workplace workplace for all these years, and with stigma, and the things that Jamie alluded to that he went through personally, and the comments from friends of his who said, I never would have known. What we've really learned through COVID is that we have been accommodating differences in the workplace. Every one of us who's worked remotely, and even those in office, in person, the changes we've had to make, every one of those exchanges was an accommodation to the differences that we all brought to the workplace. What a great opportunity then in the disability inclusion world to take advantage of what we learned in the last 14 months through COVID, to say this is a time when we should be proactively talking even more about disability inclusion, because we've demonstrated as an employee assistance function, as an HR function, as an employer, that we can make accommodations and keep working. That's a very important message of what we've learned through COVID. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate your time and your words. I have the pleasure to introduce Luis Orslin. He's a director for the Employer and Workplace Policy team on the U.S. Department of Labor. His team fulfills its mission by encouraging adoption and implementation of disability employment policies and practices that meet the needs of private and public employers and individuals with disabilities. He has more than 20 years of experience developing and implementing disability-related public sector initiatives and 15 years of experience providing customized training to private industry, public agencies, and others. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce to everyone Lou Orslin.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for that introduction, Patrick. I'm really grateful to KPMG and Disability In for this opportunity to speak for a few minutes today. Also appreciated meeting with the leaders of KPMG in advance of the meeting, and would really like to call out Sharif, who serves as the Washington Metro AIM BRG champion. During our pre-conference meeting, Sharif was incredibly passionate about ensuring that we're meeting the needs of KPMG employees with this webinar. And I can just say that, with working with so many organizations over the years, I've really not seen that kind of commitment and advocacy. So I applaud KPMG and particularly Sharif. And thanks very much to Jamie for sharing your story and your work. Hearing such stories really breaks down the stigma that holds so many people back from finding their voice and, to use the word again, their power. And before we launch into just a couple of Q&As with Greg, I wanted to note that our mental health toolkit at askearn.org for employers it contains a number of tools for mental health. And you'll also find a lot of those tools on the resource slides at the end of this slide deck. And I will just now click, and I've just put the link in the chat as well. I point out the toolkit because it really includes a number of success stories from companies like Merck, Starbucks, and EY. And really, one of the commonalities of these success stories that we've found has been the use of employee assistance programs. It's really been interesting how these programs have been quickly transformed and expand to meet the needs of employees with not only employees with long-standing mental health or mental well-being conditions, but also employees who are having some mental health and well-being issues for the first time because of the pandemic. With that, I'm just, for the last few minutes that we have together, I'm just going to dig a little bit deeper and talk to Greg about these employee assistance programs. So, Greg, again, much as Jamie, a very powerful presentation and great overview of EAPs. But now let's just talk a little bit further about employee assistance programs and COVID. And let's just take a step back and really talk about what an EAP is and how employees who need mental health support find their EAP. What's the traditional path?
So one basic thing to think of, every employer, although many employers recruit from all over the world, on the whole, employers hire the employees from the communities where they operate. There is not a single community in the U.S. that's free of problems. There's always going to be alcohol and drug, mental health issues. There's going to be food insecurity. There's going to be anorexia. You just run the list. You know, we started off earlier with 1 in 5 of this, 1 in 10 will have this. If you add up all those 1 in whatevers, you're well over 100. So we're all it, by the way. And so that comes in we come in the door of work every day of the week, figuratively, virtually or literally. So there's no reason in the world for any company to think that they're not going to be affected by the problems in their community. They are the community by way of who they hire. So number one, employers have an option now what to do. Either ignore that this happens or do something about it. So one of the roles of employee assistance is to provide consultation for employers on options on how to handle the situations that inevitably walk through the door of their workplace every day of the week. The second is to then work with the employee to provide the employee with options on how to handle the issues that they're facing. The one thing that employee assistance is it's not just counseling. There's an awful lot of work that I used to do in my employee assistance role where I never actually met with an employee. The entirety of the time was spent with the manager or others in the departments on how to work with the problem, work with the issue, how to orchestrate an environment that brings people forward so that they seek assistance. So employee assistance provides consultation, options for services that drive solutions. It's not just counseling.
So Greg, I really appreciate that, particularly starting out and prefacing with the issues or challenges of the community or the challenges of the workplace too. I think that's a tremendous point to make. I'm wondering, so with EAPs and someone's experiencing a mental health crisis, so what is though the level of service that an EAP would provide, and then what does the handoff look like to benefits, employer benefits or HR in an organization? What does that process look like?
First level of response can be done by anyone, not just employee assistance, and it's done by anyone all the time, co-workers, family, supervisors, managers, and that's to listen. So much of what needs to happen just begins with listen to what the person's telling you. And by way of what you're hearing, they will guide you to what needs to happen next. I often hear from people that, I'm not equipped to handle this, I'm not trained to do this. Listen. People will tell you what they need. The second is just support that, what you hear. And once you've decided on how to support that, is as little as being silent and present and supportive to overtly involved by taking them somewhere, everything in between. Then the process of assessment, and that's where employee assistance generally comes in. What is it we're actually looking at here? And what are the options now? So we got listen, support, assess, and now it's refer. What is the next best step? Is it someone who can take this in a clinical realm and refine it into diagnosis and work with it? Is this more of a safety issue where safety is now preeminent and we need to do that first? Or is this an issue that can wait a little bit, get others involved, family, spouse, etc., and then treat. So there's a continuum of listen, support, assess, refer, treat. An employee assistance program will be involved with all aspects of that continuum, depending on program design, internal, external, online. We all work a little differently, but the basics are the same. And eventually you move someone from a stated need to a treatment response or service response if it's a non-treatment issue. such as legal, financial, and many others. The handoff is actually pretty smooth. Where the resistance comes in is when you get into the details of a benefits plan, the details of copays, the realities of finances. It's often in that realm where things fall apart. That's not a program design issue, that's a benefits issue. That's a whole nother discussion.
Thank you very much, Greg. I appreciate that. The next question is, we've talked a lot about mental health conditions and well-being, and it's such a topical area these days that I think many of us are really starting to feel like it's normalized in the workplace, that these conversations are more normalized. Do you, in your opinion, do you think this will lead to less stigma in the workplace?
I think it will, if we take that important step of saying, this is us now. I'll go very quickly, just a little bit about the DeLapp family. In the DeLapp family tree, it's a big tree, by the way. I'm one of 26 grandchildren. We have alcohol and drug issues. We have depression. We have bipolar issues. I had a brother-in-law commit suicide 3 years ago.
When I click on
we have aging parent issues. We had Alzheimer's with my father. We have anxiety disorders.
Greg, this is Catherine McCary. I hate to even stop you at this moment. I think we should have talked for another 3 hours, but I do know that we want to be able to take some questions from the audience.
Okay, if I could, Catherine, what I wanted to make by way of example of this family is to say, this is your typical American family. The stigma no longer is warranted. This is normal.
Thank you very much, Greg, for that. Appreciate that. Catherine, did we want to take Sophie's question first, or are there others in the queue?
So this is Catherine. Megan is going to help us go through those.
Okay, sounds real good.
You can stay on.
Thanks very much again, Greg. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you both.
Yep, so I think we'll start with Sophie's question then. I heard that people are having a hard time connecting with a counselor because of the tremendous spike in need. Greg, is that something you've experienced?
So, depending on program design, that has been an issue in employee assistance. And I've been on my colleagues quite heavily to about the worst response you can give is, we can fit you in 2 weeks from Tuesday. Right now, there are online services like BetterHelp and Talkspace where instant access is available. Employee assistance providers are getting much better, and I'm pushing them to get much better at fast response. There's a second issue, and that is that across the U.S., there is a critical shortage of trained clinicians. Where I live in Reading, Pennsylvania, Berks County, Pennsylvania. In Berks County, Pennsylvania, 460,000 people, there's one child psychiatrist. The waiting period to get in for an appointment is almost 1 year. That's completely unacceptable. So yes, there is an issue over access that can be addressed. There's a second issue over availability of trained clinicians.
Great, thank you. And that is the only question we have in the chat at this point. So Catherine, did you want to wrap us up by going through the resources slides?
Sure, that would be great. Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you. Greg, I certainly didn't mean to cut you off because I love the way that you describe things and share your knowledge. I just want to be mindful of our time. So let's move to the next slide, please. And I want to make sure that, and everybody who is registered will get a copy of this presentation. But here's some resources that we put together. And the second resource slide is from EARN, I believe. You go to the next one. And then the next slide is contact information. I'm going to leave that up for actually, I'm just going to leave it up and talk to you about what's the next slide so that you can reach out to folks if you'd like to continue the conversation. The DC Metro Disability In chapter is doing another webinar in June, and this webinar is focused on supplier diversity. So if you'll go to the next slide. Oops, well, we've already gone through questions. And let's go to thank you, and let's go to the slide after that. Okay, there you go. Oops, I lost you. Learning and Advancing Disability Entrepreneurship and Engagement on June the 9th. The registration is there. We'll talk about the National Center for Disability Entrepreneurship at the Viscardi Center. And I just wanted to put that on your calendars. We'll send you an information as that as well. So thank you again. If you want to go back to our contact information, Megan, just so everyone has a chance to look at it once more. But I will send out this deck to everyone that's registered. And Megan, if you can do the same for the KPMG folks.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Sheree.
No, thank you, Catherine. I just want to take a quick moment to thank all our presenters today. You, Catherine, Jamie, Greg, Lou. This was a great event, and thank you for taking the time to share thoughts and having this conversation that is, I hope it's going to be beneficial to all the participants, and also want to thank the participants for attending today's event, and looking forward to future events as part of AIM.
Thank you, Sheree.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.